Top of the morning, everyone. My name is Tshidi, and I'm back with another video. And today's video is how to answer what are your salary expectations. Recently, obviously, this question has actually been receiving a lot of discussions on LinkedIn and other platforms because people are actually asking questions about why do companies ask this question. The truth is, at some point, if you're looking for a job, someone will actually ask you this question, either in the form of what are your salary expectations or what is your current salary. The latter one, which is what is your current salary, unfortunately or fortunately, you're not allowed to ask it. I think in the United States, you're not allowed to actually ask your candidates what their current salary is, as that information is normally very confidential. And I also understand why it's very important that this question shouldn't be asked in 2022 and going forward. However, today we're tackling what are your salary expectations, which has got nothing to do with what your current package is. I've been lucky enough that in my current roles or my previous roles, I've had the opportunity to ask these questions to understand if the company can afford the candidate. And I always play open cards with the different candidates. This usually happens during the interview process to allow the hiring manager as well as total rewards to evaluate whether your expectations are on par with what we actually are willing to offer or what the industry average is. I'm going to attempt to give the best way to deal with this question depending on where you are in your career and what you're currently looking for. And I have previously done a video about this particular question. However, it wasn't as detailed as this one. So this one is going to give a bit of a step-by-step, and you can choose whichever one of the few things that I'll provide that you would actually like to follow. Here are some of the topics that I'm going to talk about. Number one is, why do employers ask your salary expectations? How to answer this question? What are the salary expectations in any job interview? And lastly, what to actually avoid when you're answering this question, because you could find yourself in a very disadvantageous point if you're not very careful. Let me first tackle, why do employers ask what are your salary expectations? There are so many different reasons why employers ask these questions, but I would like to tackle maybe about two of those. Expectations in an interview process is normally one of the primary reasons is that they want to ensure that the salary that you expect is something that they're able to provide. Many companies have got different budgets when they take the role to the market to actually advertise that role. And you'll find that they will normally want to find out if they like this candidate, will they be able to even afford that? And I think it also helps not waste your time as a candidate. And in many companies, the set budget can always be changed because they'll look at what your expectations are and what the skills are and what you're capable of doing, and then they'll adjust it accordingly. The second reasons why companies typically ask, what are your salary expectations, is to try and stay within that set budget. Some organizations will adjust their budget if the candidate offers exceptional talent or if it's a scarce skill. Now, you'll find that there's certain roles that are very scarce in the market. That means a lot more companies are paying a lot more money for those skills. So in some instances, it's actually also very, very good for the company to readjust their benchmarks based on the information that they gather from the different candidates. Now, if several candidates are asking for a similar salary that's a lot higher than what the company's originally budgeted for, they would normally go back to total rewards and say, listen, based on this role and based on what we're looking at in the market, these are some of the things that we need to actually adjust and make sure that we find the right candidates. Other reasons that employers may ask this particular interview question is, for example, to make sure that you are not overqualified for the job. If you're asking for a great deal more than what the company is asking for, if you're asking for a lot more money than what the company can actually offer, you'll find that what the candidates are requesting for might be either too experienced or too overqualified for this position. I do also know that some companies or recruiters will also not share what their budget for the role is, which makes answering this question one-sided. While it's not a bad thing to be any more than the role, it is also possible that the role given is for a much junior role compared to your current or previous roles. Now, on the other hand, unfortunately, most candidates share their salary expectations based on their current salaries, which might prove to be way lower than what the company is budgeted for. And this unfortunately could work against that particular candidate. To assess whether you know your worth. Now, there is an assumption that the best candidates know what their value is, and what they bring to the table. Asking for a salary in an appropriate range and that represents your skills and experience level shows hiring managers that you know your worth and you aren't afraid to ask what you deserve. This is mainly because confidence is assumed to be a very good trait that many employers value. Knowing your worth will ultimately benefit you during your job search. This unfortunately is not always the case though for a lot of people. Now, we then have to answer, okay, cool. So now you've had these reasons, you understand what these reasons are, why they actually asked this question. How do you then answer such a question? How do you answer what are your salary expectations in a job interview? There's a few principles that I always say people should follow. The first principle is research the salary for the position. To give an accurate salary request that aligns with the market average in your industry, you must first know what the market average is. You must know what banking offers, you must know what consulting offers, you must know what pharmaceutical space offers. You can also research what other people in your position make who have the similar experience and educational level. The other best place to actually use is Glassdoor. I've recently used this in the past as well, and it's actually very accurate. I do know that in some regions there's not enough information on Glassdoor that's available, but in some regions, like in Europe, for example, you'll find that the information is readily available and you can literally input, even look at the company specific information to understand what they would normally pay for some of those. The information is inputted by previous candidates, so that's why it's always normally very, very accurate. The second thing that you must also do is to factor in any expenses. If you'll need to relocate or incur any other expenses to take home this role, you must factor that in as an expense that you must request in your salary. Also, one of the things that people forget these days is that working remotely has been one of the primary things that we've done in the last 2 years versus hybrid or 100% in the office. If for the last 2 years you've spent, or even now, even if you've spent a lot more time working from home, and then all of a sudden you get a role that requires you to travel up and down every single day of the week, you must also make sure that you factor that in when you actually calculate the salary expectations. Like, for example, if you're in Switzerland and you live, let's say, about an hour away, you must factor in the expectation that there'll be about 2,000 or so Swiss francs that you'll have to actually spend yearly on train tickets to go back and forth between your house as well as that. And in some instances, you must also think about the petrol prices that have gone up in recent events, where recently a lot of the petrol prices actually gone, or they've skyrocketed in the recent events that are currently happening in the world. So it's very, very important that you actually make sure that you factor that in so that you don't actually feel worse off when it comes to what the company offers you. The other thing that you need to also look at is choose a salary range. Rather than offering a set of numbers for salary you must expect, you must always provide the employer with a range in which you would like your salary to fall in. Try to keep your range a bit tight, because one of the things that people make a mistake about is to give a range where you can literally park a truck in between. There's just way too much of a difference that even if they gave you at the beginning of that range, it's still too far off what you were expecting because you were hoping that they'll give you the middle part of that range. That is one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people do make. So I would say make sure that you keep the range a bit tighter. Make sure that the expectation is also reasonable, because if the company is not willing to offer within that range, you should also always be willing to walk away. Make sure that whenever you speak to the recruiters or the line managers, they always understand why you've provided that particular range. And if they do offer something way below the range that you actually expected, you should be willing to say, listen, based on my current expenses at the moment, I don't think this is the right role for me. The other thing that you can also do is to avoid the question. Some hiring managers or recruiters may ask you the preferred salary very early on in the process before you fully understand all the details of the job. Whether it's a position you're truly interested in or whichever the company that you're interested in, sometimes answering this question so early on could also work against you as a candidate. While you'll have the opportunity to eventually talk about the salary expectations, you can deflect the question to avoid having to answer until you're ready. A good answer for deflecting this question could be, I know we just recently started with the interview process. While I would love to give you an answer at the moment, I'd love to know more about the role, the company benefits, and the challenges that this role will bring before I give you that answer. I'll be more than happy to answer that later on in the process. That's a nice way of making sure that you avoid that. The second way in which you can actually say this is to say, unfortunately, I do not know enough about your company benefits to give you an accurate salary expectation that will actually not leave me worse off than my current role. You see, do you understand that one of the things that you're trying to say is, I don't want to give you a range right now that I'm going to change a lot later because I realize that some of the benefits that you provide will end up making me worse off than what I'm currently is. I'd love to hear more about your benefit first so that I can see if I'd lose on anything out that I actually have, including vacation dates or leave days. Be a bit more open to other compensation options as well. There are several ways in which we can actually be compensated by an employer, including health benefits, additional paid time off, or leave days, more vacation days that you might have, or even shares. Some of the companies are actually offering quite a lot of shares for their employees. While some of these expectations or the compensation benefits may not readily be seen as your actual paycheck and will not be seen in your paycheck every month, the additional income that you'd normally get at the end of the process, whether it's after 2 years or 3 years, will normally be brilliant for your career and your salary. For example, recently Microsoft announced that they'll be increasing their budget for employee salary increases and boost the amount of compensation it gives to some of its workers across the globe by about 25%. And this is mainly to try and retain staff as well as make sure that they actually avoid or cope with current inflation. So if your company is not looking at that at this stage, this is the time to actually start using that in and start speaking about that. Understand what your inflation rate is in your country that you're actually working in. Even though these might sound a bit easier for you to actually do. Now, the next thing that you need to think about is what you need to avoid when you actually answer these questions. One of the things that we always tend to do is, because it's actually such a very sensitive topic, we tend to want to quickly give an exact amount. Avoid providing the hiring manager or the recruiter with an exact amount if possible. A set amount can give off the impression that you aren't open to negotiations, because they could just start thinking, okay, this guy wants about 60 or 70% increase to what we were willing to actually offer from a role point of view, and they're not willing to actually negotiate. That means we shouldn't even continue going forward. The other thing that you need to also worry about is being unprepared. You want to go into any interview with a good idea of your salary expectations. Not being prepared can lead to you asking for or accepting a salary that's lower than what you actually deserve and what you can afford. And that's quite a bit of a problem, because then you get into a situation where you start calculating things. You've already accepted the offer. You start day one, month end salary comes in, and you realize it's actually a lot lower than what you were earning. Now, this is mainly because you were unprepared. Now, the moment you start the exercise of saying, I'm looking for a job, I would advise to please start looking at these things before you even get into any of the interviews. The last thing that you need to avoid is to provide a far too high of a salary. Avoid asking for a salary that's much higher than the industry average to keep from pricing yourself out of that position or that particular role. And that's one of the mistakes that people make. People tend to make the mistake that says, okay, I'm going to ask as much as I can because these guys have to pay me this money. It's not always going to work for you. So avoid doing such a thing. I hope that will actually help you with some of your job interview and some of the questions that you might deal with when it comes to salary. Top of the morning again, once again with Tshidi, and see you again next week Tuesday. Peace.